A large German shepherd, his coat slicked flat by the rain, faced the road with the stillness of a sentinel. He was not pacing, not barking. He stood over a low, damp cardboard box, his paws planted on either side as if anchoring it to the ground. Now and again, his head lowered, ears swiveling toward some sound too faint for human hearing. When a shadow passed a cyclist on the far side of the street, his body stiffened, muscles coiled, but he did not move away. Inside the box, something shifted, the faintest rustle, followed by a sound that would be lost to all but the closest listener, a tiny, high-pitched mew. The shepherd's ears twitched, and he glanced down, his muzzle dipping toward the opening in the damp cardboard. Another mew answered the first, weaker this time. The dog's breath came out in a visible plume. In the cold, he shifted his stance, the claws of one paw scraping the wet pavement as he leaned closer. Rain slid from the brim of the sagging box onto his nose, but he did not flinch. His eyes scanned the street again, a slow sweep from left to right, then back to the alley behind him, as if expecting or perhaps dreading what might emerge from its shadows. Somewhere beyond sight, a door banged shut. The sound carried faintly, muffled by the rain, but it was enough to send the shepherd's tail into a low, wary sway. He pressed his body closer to the box now, lowering his head over the narrow opening so the rain struck his shoulders instead of what lay inside. His breath stirred the shadows beneath the cardboard flap, and another mule answered, a chorus of three now, fragile, insistent. The scent in the air was layered, wet concrete, rust from the metal siding of the warehouse, and beneath it all, the faint, warm musk of fur and milk. The shepherd knew this scent well. It kept him anchored here, as the hours slid by and the rain thickened to a steady curtain. From the mouth of the alley, movement flickered, a hunched figure in a dark hood, pausing, glancing toward the dog. The shepherd's head rose instantly, his eyes locking with the stranger's. The figure took one step forward, then hesitated. The dog's lips parted slightly, revealing the curve of teeth, not in a snarl, but in a warning that left no room for misunderstanding. After a pause, the hooded figure turned away, disappearing into the rain. The shepherd's gaze lingered on the empty space where the stranger had been. Then he returned his attention to the box, his body lowered fractionally as if shielding it from a danger only he could sense. Time blurred. Cars passed in the distance. Somewhere overhead, a gull cried once, its voice flat in the wet air. The shepherd did not leave. When the wind gusted, he stepped in closer. When the rain eased, he shook himself once but did not turn away. And still, the tiny mews came, each one a thread pulling him tighter to this spot. Then, without warning, a sound rose from the far end of the alley, a deep guttural growl, too low and throaty to belong to a dog of his kind. The shepherd's head snapped toward it, ears erect, body rigid. Another growl followed, closer this time, mingling with the wet shuffle of paws against the pavement dot in the shadows beyond the warehouse corner. Something moved large, low to the ground, and deliberate. The shepherd stepped fully in front of the box now, his body forming a wall between the kittens and whatever emerged from the darkness. The rain drummed harder on the metal roof above, masking smaller sounds. Only the steady rise of that low growl cut through, edging closer. The shepherd's tail stiffened, his stance widened. The mewing inside the box grew frantic, as if sensing the shift in the air. And then, from the darkness at the alley's end, two pale eyes caught the light. The pale eyes held their place in the darkness, steady and unblinking, the way only a predator watches when it knows the distance is closing in its favor. A faint shape materialized around them, a broad head, a sleek body, shoulders rolling low to the ground. The rain caught the faint sheen of fur as the animal stepped forward, paused, silent, despite the water pooling on the cracked pavement. The shepherd didn't move from his guard. His head lowered slightly, neck tense, ears fixed forward. A drop of water slid down the curve of his muzzle, but his eyes never left the advancing form. Inside the box the kittens stirred, their mews sharpening, as if the fear in the air was something they could smell as well as hear. The shape stopped, just shy of the faint light spilling from the street lamp. In its stillness, the details resolved a feral dog, lean and wiry, its ribs faint beneath its wet coat, lips curling back, to expose a row of yellowed teeth. Hunger lived in the hollow of its flanks, but something else, desperation, shone in its eyes. The shepherd's chest rose once in a deep, controlled breath, a silent calculation of the ground between them. Rain pattered on metal, drummed on asphalt, filled the pores between the two animals like a taut wire. The feral took a step forward, slow and deliberate, head tilted as if weighing the shepherd's resolve. The shepherd responded with a step of his own, not forward, but to the side, adjusting his stance to cover the box more completely. His tail was high now, rigid, the tip twitching. A single low bark broke from his throat, not loud, but enough to vibrate through the wet air. The feral froze, its ears flattened slightly, not in fear, but in the acknowledgement of an opponent willing to defend. It lowered its head, pacing a short arc, testing the shepherd's focus. Every time it shifted, the shepherd mirrored it, his eyes never leaving its face, his weight always forward. The rain thickened again, running in rivulets down their bodies, blurring the edges of the scene into muted grays. For a moment, the feral's gaze flicked to the box, The shepherd moved at once, stepping closer, his chest brushing the soggy cardboard. The kittens quieted, as though even their tiny voices might break the fragile balance between safety and danger. The feral stopped pacing. It stood still, water dripping from its muzzle, ears flicking at the rain. Then it exhaled a sharp, frustrated sound and turned its head toward the alley's mouth, scenting the air. Its body eased, but its hunger did not leave. It stepped back once, twice, eyes darting between the shepherd and the dark beyond. Then, with a flick of its tail, it slipped into the deeper shadows, its shape vanishing as if swallowed by the rain itself. The shepherd did not follow. His head remained high, ears rotating for the faintest sound. Only when the last echo of paw steps faded did he lower his head toward the box. A quiet whimper left his throat, met by the softest answering mew from within. Minutes passed. The rain eased to a mist, and the street lamp's glow began to reach a little farther into the alley. The shepherd shifted his weight, stretching one leg before settling back into his watch. But something had changed. His eyes moved often now, not only toward the place the feral had stood, but to the road beyond, to the windows of the warehouse, to the doorways where humans might appear. When they did, it was without warning. A pair of footsteps, quick and purposeful, entered the street from the far end. A human figure came into view, a woman in a heavy coat, who'd pulled low, holding a flashlight in one hand. The beam cut across the rain-slicked ground, scattering light against the walls. She paused when it caught the shepherd, her face hidden in shadow. But the stillness in her body marked the moment she saw the box at his feet. The shepherd's head rose, ears pricked forward, his tail lowered, not in submission, but in the quiet wariness he reserved for people he did not know. The woman took a step closer, light fixed on the box, and the faint sound of the kittens reached her ears. She froze again, her expression unreadable in the dim light. The shepherd did not move. His eyes stayed on her, assessing, weighing something beyond instinct. The rain between them whispered against the pavement, a steady rhythm marking the seconds as they stood in silent regard. Then, the woman shifted the flashlight from the box to his face, the light catching in his eyes. For a moment, the two looked at each other, and in that pause, the question lingered: would she draw closer to help? Or was this a moment where human hands might undo the very thing he had spent the night protecting? The woman didn't speak. Her breath clouded faintly in the cold as she took another step forward, the beam of her flashlight trembling just slightly in the misty air. The shepherd's ears tipped back for an instant, then forward again. His gaze fixed not on the light but on her face beneath the hood, searching for some signal he could trust. She crouched slowly, the fabric of her coat whispering against itself, and angled the light down toward the box. The cardboard was bowed and soft from the rain, edges sagging, but still it sheltered what lay inside. Tiny shapes shifted in the dim glow, no more than shadows wrapped in damp scraps of fur. One stirred, lifting its head toward the new presence, its eyes still closed, mouth opening in a silent plea before the mule emerged. The shepherd moved a half-step sideways, his chest still a barrier between the woman and the box. His posture was no longer a wall of defiance, but a gate with its latch undecided. He watched her hand hover in the air, hesitating before lowering toward the flap of the box. From somewhere beyond the alley came the soft rattle of loose metal, shutters shifting in the wind or something heavier nudged by movement. The shepherd's head snapped toward the sound, ears erect. The woman froze, following his gaze into the darkness, her light trailing uncertainly over brick and shadow. Nothing moved, yet the shepherd's body remained taut, his muscles braced, as though the sound had stirred a memory. The woman glanced back at the dog, her brow furrowed beneath the hood. In the brief stillness, a change passed over her face, something like recognition. She lowered her hand further, letting it rest lightly on the edge of the box, careful not to push it open fully. The shepherd didn't lunge or step back. He simply watched, every breath measured, as if the choice of whether to let her see was his alone. When the flap shifted under her fingers, the smell of wet fur and milk rose more strongly. The kittens huddled together, tiny bodies trembling in the chill. Their coats were patchy, still clumped in places from the damp, but their movements were restless, a quiet pulse of life that had held through the long hours. One nudged forward, brushing its head against the sagging cardboard, as if seeking warmth from something it couldn't quite reach. The woman's eyes softened, her lips parted, perhaps to speak to them, but no words came. Instead, she looked back at the shepherd. He met her gaze without lowering his head, an unspoken question hanging between them, whether she understood that her next movement would decide the shape of what came next. A faint, rhythmic patter began at the far end of the alley, lighter than the rain, sharper than falling water. The shepherd's ears swiveled instantly, his body angling so one flank shielded the box, while his gaze locked on the mouth of the alley. The woman straightened, the beam of her flashlight following his line of sight. There, at the edge of its reach, the shape of a man appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, a hood pulled low to shadow his face. He stopped the moment the light caught him, raising one hand to shield his eyes. In the wet hush, his voice carried faintly, low and rough. "That's my dog." The shepherd's tail dropped an inch lower, the muscles in his legs tightening. He didn't step toward the man. but the air between them seemed to narrow, pulling the alley into a tighter space. The man took a slow step forward, his eyes fixed not on the woman, but on the dog. The woman shifted her stance, placing one foot slightly ahead of the other, not in challenge, but as if bracing for an uncertainty she could feel building. "They're kittens," she said, her voice even but quiet, almost as if she were speaking to herself. The man gave no reply. His hand dropped from his face, and in the weak light, his expression was unreadable. Another step forward. The shepherd moved, then just a subtle lean, his head tilting lower, eyes steady on the man. A low rumble began deep in his chest, not loud enough to echo, but enough to weave itself into the rain's rhythm. The kittens inside the box shifted restlessly at the sound, their tiny cries rising in uneven intervals. The man stopped, his gaze flicking briefly toward the box before returning to the shepherd. His shoulders rolled back, his weight settling evenly on both feet, and for a moment, the stillness was so complete that even the rain seemed quieter. Then from somewhere beyond the street lamp, a second shape moved smaller, faster, slipping along the edge of the shadows toward the alley's mouth. The shepherd's head turned just enough to track it, his stance unchanged but his ears sharpening their angle. The woman didn't move her light toward the shape. She kept it on the man's face, though her breath had quickened. The second figure drew closer, the sound of its steps muted by the rain, until it stopped just beyond the line of sight. The air felt heavier now, the way it does when something unseen is preparing to break from cover. Rain beaded on the shepherd's coat, each drop sliding down to darken the pavement at his feet. He stood between the man and the woman as though the space behind him, where the box lay, was the only piece of ground worth defending. The second figure lingered at the alley's mouth, motionless but watching, even without seeing the face. The shepherd's body recognized the pattern of its weight, the quiet way it shifted from foot to foot. The man stepped forward again. His boots made no splash. He was careful, deliberate. The shepherd's chest swelled with a slow inhale, his ears angling forward just enough to signal readiness. The woman, still holding the flashlight, shifted it slightly so the beam caught the edge of the box. The kittens inside stirred, their cries now more frequent, more desperate. For a moment, the sound seemed to tether all three of them in place, the man, the woman, the dog. Then the second figure moved, stepping into the pale reach of the light. A boy, no more than 12, his clothes too thin for the weather, his hair plastered to his forehead. His hands were empty, but his eyes darted to the box with an urgency that had nothing to do with curiosity. The shepherd's gaze flicked between the two humans, weighing them without moving a muscle. The man glanced back at the boy, and something in his expression tightened, an edge of calculation replacing whatever claim he'd made moments before. "Let's go," he said, not to the dog, but to the boy. The woman didn't lower the light. Her voice was steady when she asked, "Are they yours?" The boy looked at her, then away. The man's reply was a flat, "Doesn't matter." His hand twitched at his side, the faintest hint of impatience, as though every moment here was costing him something he couldn't afford to lose. The shepherd took one deliberate step backward, his flank brushing the box, his eyes never leaving the man. The woman noticed, and in that brief shift she understood he wasn't guarding just the kittens. He was guarding a choice. The boy's eyes returned to the box, softening in a way that betrayed him. Whatever his connection to the man, his interest in the kittens was separate, quieter, almost pleading. He took a half step forward before the man's voice stopped him cold. "Leave it." The shepherd's ears flicked at the tone. Something in it matched the tension that had kept him here through the long hours of rain. The man took another step closer, and the dog's posture shifted, weight forward now, head low, a warning that didn't need sound to be understood. In the distance, thunder rolled low over the rooftops, carrying the damp metallic scent of a storm building faster than the night expected. The woman's gaze lifted briefly toward the sky, catching the way the rain had thickened again, heavier, drops striking her hood with sharper rhythm. Somewhere close, water began spilling from an overflowing gutter, pooling toward the alley's entrance. The boy flinched at a sudden crack of wind between the buildings, his thin frame shivering. The man looked past him toward the street as if measuring the time left before the storm's full weight arrived. "We're done here," he muttered, but his eyes still lingered on the box. The shepherd held his ground. The woman shifted her footing, angling herself slightly toward the dog, not between him and the man, but close enough to signal she was no threat to what he guarded. The dog's ears twitched once in acknowledgement, then stilled. The man turned sharply toward the street, his boots splashing through the new streams forming along the cracked pavement. The boy hesitated, his eyes locked on the kittens for one last moment before following. They disappeared into the rain, swallowed by the sound of wind rattling loose siding along the warehouse wall. The shepherd didn't move to chase them. Instead, he lowered his head to the box, nudging the softened edge with his nose. The kittens answered with faint cries, curling into the shadows of the cardboard. Another gust of wind swept the alley, colder now, carrying the distinct scent of river water. The woman looked toward the street, frowning at the way the air had shifted. From the far end, a low rushing sound began to build, not the steady patter of rain, but something heavier, moving fast. The shepherd's head rose, ears rigid. His body turned toward the sound even before the first trickle of water snaked past his paws, carrying bits of leaf and grit. The woman's light caught it glistening for an instant before more followed, filling the cracks in the pavement. The sky rumbled again, closer this time. The wind brought with it the unmistakable scent of floodwater. The water came quickly, slipping through the mouth of the alley in a widening sheet, dark with silt and leaves. It moved with a sound that was less a rush than a constant, heavy exhale, filling the low ground in moments. The shepherd stepped once toward it, head low, nose twitching as though reading the current. Behind him, the box shuddered with the kittens' movement, their small cries nearly swallowed by the growing noise. The woman's eyes swept the alley, measuring its slope, noting how the water pooled first against the warehouse wall before curling toward the back where the ground dipped further. She crouched, one hand steadying the box, the other brushing the damp flap to see inside. The kittens pressed against each other, shivering, their fur clumped from the cold. She glanced toward the shepherd. His gaze was fixed on the waters, in advance, but at the sound of the box shifting, he turned, ears high. The first shallow wave lapped against his paws, bringing a fresh scent of earth and metal. He didn't retreat. Instead, he moved closer to the woman, standing at her side as she lifted the box. It was lighter than she expected, but soft at the base where the rain had weakened it. She held it high enough to keep it from the water and looked toward the street. The flow there was faster now, churning around debris, carrying the occasional scrap of wood or branch from somewhere upstream. The shepherd stepped ahead of her, nose to the wind, as if testing each path before committing. Together they moved, toward the street, water eddying around their ankles, the cold soaking through cloth and fur alike. The woman's breath came harder, but she kept the box steady. The dog's pace was unbroken, his body angled to clear the way. At the corner, the street opened into a wider view, storm drains overflowing, gutters spilling water down in narrow waterfalls from the buildings. The air carried the raw chill of moving floodwater, sharper now against the skin. The shepherd slowed, looking from the street to a narrow gap between two brick structures. The woman followed his gaze and saw a strip of ground rising away from the main flow, a small escape above the level where the water seemed to gather. They crossed to it, stepping onto gravel that shifted underfoot but held against the current. The woman lowered the box onto a dry patch and knelt, peeling back the flap. The kittens blinked against the dim light, eyes barely open, paws flexing weakly. She reached in, her fingers brushing the warmth of their tiny bodies, then drew her coat around them to shield them from the wind. The shepherd stood just beyond her, facing the direction they'd come. His ears twitched, catching sounds carried through the narrow spaces between buildings, the rattle of metal, the distant splash of something falling into deeper water. His tail was low but still, his stance steady against the gusts. The woman rose, the kittens secure inside her coat now, and for a moment, the two simply regarded one another. No hand reached to touch him, no word passed. His eyes moved once to the bundle she carried, then back to the alley where the box had been. A shift in the wind brought the scent of the feral dog again, faint but lingering, along with the memory of eyes in the dark. The shepherd stepped backward, not toward her, but toward the open street, where the water's flow had begun to recede at the edges. His gaze lingered on her one last time, steady and unreadable, before he turned fully, paws moving into the wet. The sound of his steps was swallowed almost instantly by the hum of the storm. She watched him go, his outline fading into the gray curtain of rain until he was nothing more than a shape, moving with purpose through the softened world. The kittens stirred faintly against her chest, their breath warmed through the fabric, each one a small, consistent pulse of life. The water in the alley would drain slowly. The box would collapse in the cold. But in that brief, unspoken exchange, something had passed between them, a quiet recognition that the work of keeping life safe is not always finished in sight of others. The rain eased to a fine mist, hanging like breath over the street, and the last ripples of the flood slipped quietly into the drains. Somewhere beyond the corner, unseen, the shepherd kept walking,